Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
So I remember growing up, summer vacations, traveling with my family, going to hotels, and in the morning, there would always be a USA Today. And my favorite thing about getting the USA Today and bringing it into the hotel room was that little snapshot of the day, the little chart in the corner. I think it's one of their signature items. You know, being young and like really not probably understanding just the news in general, it was really nice to just kind of see that little chart. And I was always entertained by it. And in fact, at Headset, we actually did one of those charts years and years ago on 420. They were looking for some data on sales growth, and we were able to do that, which was a super cool accomplishment for my younger self, thinking about, picking up that newspaper at the hotel. But now, today, I would say my new favorite thing about USA Today is the fact that they changed their stance on cannabis. And the editorial board recently published an op-ed finally coming around after years and years of saying, hey, we're not so sure, hey, not so fast on this whole thing, jury's still out. And just yesterday, they did this op-ed and they're all for it, which was fantastic to see.
Yeah, not only were they all for it, but they said that it would be detrimental to not carry out legalization of cannabis. And I thought that was a pretty strong statement. And, Cy, maybe it was the Headset data that was really feeding into their information to get wise on this.
That's right. I'm surprised they didn't source it. It was from like 5 years ago. But they could have called us back and we would have given them updated numbers that look even better than the one that we gave them back then. But we'll have to share that link in the show notes somehow. Yeah, I mean, what changed, right? Because they did this in 2014, 2016, 2018, where they were just like, no, we don't think this is the right thing, which is surprising in some ways because a lot of major publications like the New York Times had already ended up on the right side here. And they finally came around. So they cited a few things I noticed, like the teen usage stats, the two studies, one out of Colorado, one out of Washington, that showed no significant trends. And I have to believe that so many years into legal cannabis, they've got good data there. They've got data, obviously, that shows that those penalized for cannabis crimes are disproportionately Black and brown. Those capitalized on it are overwhelmingly white, as we sit here, with our podcast. And they had all sorts of good material on the story of reefer madness and the racist origins around that. So I don't know, we've been talking about a long time, these studies on teen use, have come out, right after legalization. It's always looked good. There was never any sort of spike. And, sure, now we've got years and years of data, but that's not like something new. We've all known about the criminal records, that's nothing new. I mean, more states have legalized, over the years. Maybe it was some sort of tipping point that kind of got them here. But I think it has to do with the Judiciary Committee hearing and the CAOA must be the reason why they are kind of coming back and saying, okay, we need to think about this again.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first Senate hearing really on this topic. And I think it did bring it into central focus for groups who maybe after they had written that several years ago, they kind of put the issue down and had moved on, referenced different things about the industry. But I thought this was a really impressive moment that they were willing to take a look at it and say, you know what? We had said, let's hold and see what we think about this. Now we're actually saying it's time to move forward with this. And it did remind me of when Dr. Sanjay Gupta came around when he created the three episodes of the Weed series, where he had revised his earlier opinion that there was no medical benefit to cannabis. And then it was actually through the stories of the children like Charlotte Figge that he became much more aware of the tangible results of being able to work with cannabinoid compounds. And he completely revised his opinion, which, as you pointed out last week, pointing to the medical benefits and wellness benefits of cannabinoid compounds within the plant, those that we even know about. And so he revised his opinion. And I think I love when this happens because I'm preaching to the choir. I'm a convert. I'm fully in favor of this, both through my own life experiences and also through the lives of others who I've met who've encountered this. But to have groups and organizations say, we're taking a new stance on this and this is our new opinion, and then to support it with data, and also to tell the history and the nuance behind it. So I encourage people to go check this out because there's a really great video too that's very short, and it tells the history of the racist roots of reefer madness. And it's important to know this because that's the through line. And we heard in the hearings last week that some of these senators, they didn't really want to acknowledge that aspect of it. And in fact, we're even taking a different point, as we mentioned, where they were trying to say it emboldens and empowers the cartels, which we all know is inaccurate. But I thought this was a really encouraging piece. And it was also very balanced, I thought, in terms of how it presented the information. It wasn't just a Pollyanna point of view. It was a very balanced. And so I was happy to see it.
Yeah, these things do move the needle. You got to believe that everyone traveling for their summer vacations, waking up in the hotel, grabbing that USA Today, there's got to be some hearts and minds that are changing by seeing stuff like this. And yeah, surprising to see. I don't think I had really thought about the USA Today and their position. I forgot that they weren't pro. It seems like most major media has kind of come around on it. But yeah, really, really cool to see. But it kind of, made me think about the CAOA and our conversation on the previous podcast, kind of covering the Judiciary Committee, and kind of wanted to check in on where those things are. So since then, one of the things that we mentioned was how Booker made a statement in that hearing that sounded very much like he was for like banking structure, the safe banking that we've all been talking about, that the industry's been talking about for quite some time. They've, originally come out saying, no, we have, this comprehensive gold standard that we want to go with. And then, he has since in that hearing kind of alluded to otherwise, and he's since followed up and said he is for it. And he said, quote, "I'm a compromise guy." He says, "New Jersey sent me down here to get things done, not to make stands where I make good points, but I don't pass bills." When I first read that, compromise guy, I read it as compromised. Like, just like not a great word for a senator to use. But yeah, the compromise guy is a good word. And so hopefully he's, more open to something here. He did say, however, he wants the bill to be balanced with having some restorative justice as well. And this is where I think things get really hard to get through when you have, that layered in, with your comment around, reefer madness and the racist origins, not a surprise. I think this country is still dealing with, many challenges when it comes to racism. And I think some of that stuff comes out in positions against this type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see, if he can get there, or if he ties it back to, opportunity for, minorities that maybe are struggling to get financing, which was part of that conversation. And when he kind of came around, he said, are we creating this reality, where those that can't get funding, aren't able to be successful? And I think that's certainly an angle to getting safe banking across, and something that seems like, now with these recent statements, he's more for.
Yeah. The guy who was going to lay down on the tracks instead of allowing for any compromises is now compromising. I mean, these are the winds of change are very strong in the political world, but I'm preferring this discourse over what we were seeing around the fall of last year. So we'll see where it heads. But I think, there are some things that are starting to kind of tick off on my checklist that I've been kind of building from the different political analysts that I talked to and consultants that I talked to, who said, that they were going to throw this Hail Mary pass and it was going to, miss the mark by a wholesale, just fully miss. And then it was going to give opportunity for some wiggle room for a more moderate piece of legislation to get passed, because then it's kind of like you're getting these little W's on the board. But the way to do it would be to make sure that he can point to a win on the social equity and on the restorative justice piece. So how that's going to happen, it sounds like there's some work being done around maybe pulling some things from the other big bills, as we've been talking about, that could give him that win. A lot of the things with politicians is we like to think, when we're feeling in favor of them, we like to think that they really care about the issues that they purport to care about. But a lot of it is also just about optics, about how they did on delivering on promises that they made. So the way I've come to feel about it is I don't care what the motivation is, as long as it actually does result in action that's positive and productive. So if it's about optics, fine, as long as it gets it done. If he does care about it, that's even better. Because as we were talking earlier, I cannot believe the increased rate of violent activity at stores over the last 24 months. I cannot believe it. I mean, we've been in this industry, you longer than I have. We've seen these things kind of sporadically throughout the years. We know that having a lot of cash and high value product in a location makes it a target for criminality, not from the cannabis industry, from people who are looking to rob these stores. And it's just one other thing that makes it harder. But I feel like it's been an accelerated rate of these things. And the only thing I can think of is that the macroeconomic conditions have deteriorated since the pandemic, in confluence with this lack of change. And so now people are getting more desperate. I know crime is up in many places in general, but it seems as though these dispensaries, and we know we've lost several human lives around this very thing. And it's a very serious consequence of not having the right legislation around banking. So I'm really hoping that data is really resonating. And I think you pointed out some things about that.
Well, yeah, it certainly is the narrative. And you're right. I mean, it does. I think crime dispensary retail robberies have gone up quite a bit in the cannabis space. And it's because, they're cash based and people recognize that. You're in San Francisco and you hear stories about how CVS, everything's locked up now, right? Because it's so much crime, the petty theft, right? Where people are walking in, walking out. But those are like, products, and then they've got to sell those on a black market or whatever. But if you can walk in and get cash, I mean, obviously that's ideal. And I think that's what criminals are seeing. And yeah, unfortunately, people are dying. And, the U.S. Cannabis Council, which is an advocacy group, recently hosted an event with Senator Merkley from Oregon, Blumenauer from Oregon, and Perlmutter from Colorado. Blumenauer and Perlmutter reps, but they really to showcase, I guess, these two ads that they ran and they're running, and they really focus on the crime, and they're interviewing parents of, people that have been killed in robberies, one of which just down the way from me in Tacoma. I'm here in Seattle, and Tacoma is just to the south of us. And, that's pretty close for all those reasons, right? And they talk about how the current policy is an invitation to armed robbery, and it just keeps escalating, more and more. So this, safe banking can help. At this briefing, Merkley implored supporters to thank the 42 senators who have co-sponsored the Senate version of the Safe Banking Act, which doesn't include Booker or Schumer, right, as the supporters, but maybe soon. But of those 42 senators, 9 are Republican members. That's nice to know. And then he also said in his comments, we have a challenge, and it's a challenge to have a broader perspective of also doing criminal reforms along with safe banking. And that's the restorative justice piece that I do think that is going to be the bigger challenge here. And Blumenauer said at this event that he's been doing this since 1973, and I believe that this is the year that this might get done. I don't know if he said that every year. It kind of sometimes feels like that, but I kind of am starting to believe it. I feel like we've gone through so many iterations of things and so many fits and starts with, the MORE Act, the States Act, obviously SAFE here, the CAOA. It just keeps going. The Climb Act, which we'll talk about. There's tons, right? And SAFE is the most innocuous. SAFE can actually, have, some good here with just human life, and just make it easier for people to not have to take so much cash. I don't know. I've read things like it doesn't solve everything as far as like taking credit cards and all of that, but even just taking debit, would be a welcome addition, right, to the shopping experience. So anyways, that I'm optimistic on. And then the Climb Act, which was introduced in June, is pretty interesting. It was set up in the language of the act. It says to amend any applicable federal law to permit access to community development, small business, minority development, and any other public or private financial capital sources for investment. It also creates a safe harbor for national securities exchanges to list the securities of issuers that are cannabis-related legitimate businesses, which is great, right? The uplisting question that everyone is interested in. And I think the safe harbor would also, it's not just about being on the exchanges, it's about institutional investors coming in and supporting these companies as well. Because there's a number of non-plant touching operators that I don't think still get a lot of institutional support out there, but maybe with something like this might help. But what I think is interesting about this is that it does have provisions around community development, minority development. And that's to Booker's point, right? Where he's like, hey, are we creating this reality where it's more challenging for, minority communities to be successful in this industry? And maybe SAFE doesn't solve it, but maybe Climb with SAFE in some capacity does. But at the same time, like, the simpler the better, right? Like, if we get something simple through and then we can build on it, great. These all-in-one comprehensive things, just in today's climate, I just don't know how any of it happens. But anyways, feeling better every week. I think anything can help, continue to push this forward. And we've been talking about this enough. I think that, this has got to be our year.
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think we're manifesting this change. So I'm going to stay, what is it? I'm skeptical, but I'm staying positive, and I still have hope in my heart that this gets done.
That's right. We're running out of acronyms. The next one's going to be the Hope Act, sponsored by Emily.
I think that is one.
Oh,
not by me, but
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, the audacity of hope. That was many years ago.
There you go.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.